How many of you have heard the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child? I like to kind of change that a little bit to it takes a family to raise a child, because what happens if that village becomes a government, and that government through its international relationships becomes part of a much larger government? And what will happen when those governments decide that they know how to raise your children better than you do, the parent? There's a brand new report out from the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. Some of you know it as UNESCO. It's making waves across the world. And folks, it's raising some serious red flags. For anyone who values parental and educational freedom, I encourage you to watch this video. UNESCO recently published this report. It's called Homeschooling Through, a Human Rights Lens. It sounds harmless, it even sounds academic. But inside this report, UNESCO outlines what a lot of critics are calling the most draconian attack on homeschooling in the history of the world. Now, I like to read these reports myself instead of just going by the headlines, because like you, I'm like, why do people always think the UN is so evil? And like you, I always can find the answers for it. But here's what the report actually says. UNESCO claims that governments have a quote-unquote duty to regulate homeschooling. Homeschooling is that private relationship that you have with your kids in your home, teaching them the academics that you feel they're going to need to succeed. They say that the state should make sure that every school, every homeschool, meets minimum standards of quality. Whose quality? Their quality? They believe that the government should decide what a proper education is, even in your own home. The report calls for things like mandatory registration of families who are using homeschooling. The government should know every single person who's educating their children in their own homes. It actually even goes as far as pushing for inspections and oversight, in some cases even in-home visits. And of course, it emphasizes regular evaluations to make sure that your kids are meeting the state requirements of education, what the state defines as a proper education, what they think your kids should be learning. Every day, more and more Americans are waking up to the fact that our society is simply unhealthy. We've been being fed poisons and being told to put poisons on our body by corporate America for years. A lot of the things that we've been told were bad for us, like animal fats, are actually good for our bodies. Your skin is the largest organ of your body, which is why on UNESCO Trade & Co., we're pleased to offer you guys bison tallow lotions and creams. These bison tallow lotions and creams are amazing. They're not made by a big corporation. They're made by a homesteader, just like you guys, our friends out of Canada, Dr. Nathaniel and Susan Ostashowski. We've visited numerous bison ranches and farms and parks across the entire continent of North America. And these are some really great people who have come up with some really great products, and you can buy them on UNESCO Trade & Co. and support this program and support your health all at the same time. You know, in reading this report, if you strip away the concept of human rights and equity, you're left with a very simple idea. Homeschooling only exists if the government controls it. Now, I homeschool my kids. There's no way I'm going to send my kids back to public school. They do much better at home, and statistics show that homeschoolers are far outperforming public schoolers in every single area of academics. Every state has its own regulations, and we have to follow those regulations. But what happens when a global world order that is quote-unquote making recommendations that everybody signs on to agree to starts taking that control over for themselves? That's where I think this is going more than anything. Remember, it doesn't take a village to raise a child, it takes a family to raise a child. Now, if you don't meet those requirements, the government's requirements or the UN's requirements for education, UNESCO argues that you as a parent could be held accountable for violating your child's rights to a quality education. Just let that sink in for a moment. You could be held accountable. I'm not saying that parents shouldn't be accountable for their children. I think that they should be. They should be solely accountable for the children and not the government. Because, I mean, let's be honest here. For most rural Americans and most people who utilize homeschooling systems, it isn't about rejecting education. It's about accepting responsibility for that education and choosing what their child learns and doesn't learn. What we're talking about here is somebody coming in and taking control of that process, telling you what is the right way to do it, what is the wrong way to do it, and what you have to include in your curriculum. And it's not just the state. It's not just the government. UNESCO wants this control. Homeschooling has deep roots in the United States. Faith, independence, practicality. Families do homeschooling because they care. They care about their children. Families do homeschooling because they believe that learning begins with the family, the parents, not the bureaucracy. But UNESCO sees that independence as a problem that has to be solved. They see it as a loophole that needs further regulation. This is not just a theory, okay? All around the world, not just here in the United States. Depending on which state you live in, it could be highly regulated. In some states, it's a little less regulated. But all around the world, you're starting to see homeschooling programs more and more regulated and restricted under these guidelines. When you get to countries like Germany, it is virtually illegal. In some countries, you need very hard to get permits, and the curriculum and the education is strictly regulated. You have to meet up to the standards of their curriculum, whatever that might be, whatever indoctrination they're trying to push on your children, you're the one that's going to have to implement it. But like I said, in countries where it's been able to flourish, like the United States, Canada, believe it or not, South Africa, homeschooling has flourished, and the statistics show that the homeschoolers are far exceeding the public schoolers. So why is there this push to regulate it? If they're already outperforming, the kids are already doing better, is equity in reverse? Are they saying that homeschoolers are being too smart and it's not equitable to the rest of society who goes to public school? I think that the intentions of COVID were very different, and homeschooling exploded after COVID. Many parents around the US, around the world, realized that they had the ability to educate their own children. They had been disassociated with that. They had been told that they couldn't teach their children. And in fact, it was very scary to a lot of parents when their children had to stay home. How do I teach my child? But they figured out that they actually have the ability to teach their own kids. This is a problem. So it was an unintentional consequence. It scared the bejesus out of bureaucrats. What they want to do is fold homeschoolers back into the system, take back control. They don't want this educational revolution to take place. They don't want that to happen, but it's happening. The problem with it happening is that they cannot manage it. They cannot manage those kids. They cannot manage the kids' upbringing. Right now, for those of you who send your kids to public school, do you know how much time those kids spend in the hands of the government every single day? Now, can you imagine what would happen if the kids in our countries spent that much time in the hands of their parents, caring parents, parents who are willing to put forth the energy and effort to educate their kids? Now, some of you are probably thinking, well, Trump pulled out of UNESCO. I don't really care about what happens with UNESCO. But let me remind you something. We elect a new president every so many years. And a lot of the times, the presidents, whoever is elected, will put us back into UNESCO. Heck, Bush put us in UNESCO. Of course, we're hearing a lot of negative things about Bush lately. But even if we are out of UNESCO, the influence doesn't end there. They have ways of influencing our educational communities, our state governments. This is an organization that has its tentacles running deep within society. Just because a president pulls out of UNESCO does not mean that UNESCO's influence is eliminated. That's not how it works. UNESCO sets the tone for global education policy. Their reports shape funding programs and best practices and international aid programs. So when they're telling the world that homeschooling must be regulated to the hilt, educational ministries, educational programs, future presidents are listening to them. Your local leadership is listening to them because they have established themselves as this global authority. I think for those of us who care about homeschooling, this matters more than ever. These ideas could very easily creep into federal and state law. It could mean mandatory registration, mandatory curriculums, even in-home inspections in some states if they take the advice of UNESCO. It could mean that homeschooling is no longer a right of the parent. It could mean that it's a licensed privilege. Heck, I think even in our state, you have to have a certain degree of education before you could even sign up to be a homeschool. And as you know, licensed privileges always come with fees, continuing education. I think that educational freedom is one of the last frontiers, as well as food freedom, of maintaining true local control over our kids, over our food, over our healthcare. I think when those two freedoms go, the cornerstone of American liberty is completely lost. So what do you do about it? I mean, we can't do anything about the UN, but what you can do is you can start local. Support your local groups, support your local homeschooling associations, get involved with your local homeschooling groups. Go to programs, let your voice be heard. Definitely keep your eyes on new bills that come out within your state or within the federal government that start talking about things like assessments, registrations, inspections, and other requirements associated with you being a parent teaching your kid. It sounds ridiculous, but it's not. Those are usually the first steps to somebody trying to gain more control. And they happen every single day in our communities, where families rely on independence and community over bureaucracy. But most importantly, and this is important, don't let anybody tell you that you educating your kids is a threat to society. Have you seen society today? Have you seen what the public education system has done? Have you seen what government indoctrination has done to our children, to the kids in college? You're not the threat. And in fact, I would argue that it's one of the most responsible and patriotic things you can do as a parent. Teach your kids. UNESCO phrases this as a human rights thing, but I think some people need to start reminding the UN that parental rights are human rights. I hope you guys found this story interesting and useful. Stay tuned here on UNASA TV for more stories like this that impact rural communities across America. Everybody is calling for a much colder, stormier winter. What does that mean for you? Well, it means that there could be possible power outages and some very long, dark days, because as you know, the days are only getting shorter from here on out. UNASA Trading Co. has finally launched its Bee Yard collection. We currently have natural beeswax candles for sale on UNASA Trading Co. These candles last about 10 hours each. They're clean burning. Unlike paraffin candles that put toxins into the air, beeswax candles actually help neutralize the air. We only use beeswax candles in our household because we care about our health, we care about our children's health, and we like the smell of warm honey in the dead of winter. Check out UNASA Trading Co. and order your beeswax candles today.